And they'll all get that message too when they join in, because it's very important. Everyone knows we're recording. So
Yeah, absolutely.
good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in about 15 seconds, 30 seconds or so. We're just letting everyone come in out of the waiting room and get settled. Okay. Excellent. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. If that's okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lenore, to give everybody a welcome.
Good evening, and thank you, parents, for joining us at this very important topic. And this is a curriculum that we have been utilizing for, I guess it's about 5 years or more. And I'm proud to say that we are part of the Lifelines community, and I would be remiss if I did not mention what an amazing resource the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County has been to Henry Hudson, to the Bayshore area, and to me personally, because I, had to reach out to them in a crisis last year with our school. So I value their professionalism, their knowledge. And tonight we really are very fortunate to have the creator of this curriculum, which I think is fantastic. And that's Maureen Underwood, and also Marney Rohda from the Mental Health Association. These are amazing women who dedicate their lives to helping children, and they're here to help you tonight. And please feel free to ask any questions. They will answer as best they can, as will I. And we're going to get started. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much, Lenore. Maureen, did you want to say thank you too for that great?
I do want to say thank you. That was a lovely introduction. And I want to say how glad I am to be at Henry Hudson. I'm a Monmouth County girl who is living in Dallas. And boy, I miss New Jersey. So
excellent. Well, I just wanted to briefly introduce us a little bit more than Lenore, although she really just sang our praises. So thank you very much for that. Our lead speaker today is Maureen Underwood, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She is the author and founder or developer of the Lifelines trilogy. She's been working in the field of youth suicide prevention since the 1980s. So she really has devoted her career to helping youth and helping families and communities, schools in crisis. So this is her area of expertise. She is internationally known for this topic. And I am very glad to be presenting with her today. I'm Marney Rohda. I fortunately have been able to work with Maureen on and off over the years since September 11th, when we worked very closely together, working with families who lost someone that day. I am relatively, compared to Maureen, new to Lifelines and to the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County, having begun working with both of those around the same time the pandemic started. That's not a small coincidence. And what I will tell you is that I have come to be a huge believer in the Lifelines program. And although I'm not in Monmouth County, I'm up in Morris County, I feel like I'm an honorary Monmouth County resident. So, all right. So getting started, here's what we're going to talk about today. Very simply, it's 5 things that we think everyone, parents and guardians, need to know about suicide and suicide prevention. We're going to talk briefly about why suicide prevention is important. We're going to talk about how to recognize the warning signs. What should you be looking for? We're going to talk about what your school is doing for prevention, which I will tell you is a lot. They're doing an amazing job. Also, we're going to talk about what are protective factors and how to foster them, because we want to balance some of the more what could be sometimes alarming or frightening news with the encouraging news, protective factors and what you can do to help them. And then finally, we're going to end up talking about what to do if you're worried about your child, so you know what the next step is if you recognize a warning sign. Like Lenore said, we are open to questions throughout. You do have the expert in the field here with us today. So put your questions in chat and I will be moderating them, either interrupting Maureen or asking Lenore a question, and I will make a note of them if they don't really fit in with what we're talking about to make sure we address them at the end. We're going to be with you guys today for about 40 minutes of presentation and then some time for questions at the end too. All right, Maureen, I'm giving it to you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say I don't consider myself an expert. I think if there were experts in youth suicide prevention, we wouldn't have youth suicide. So I want to put that out there right away. I have been working in this field for a lot of years. I've seen a lot of things get better. I still think there are some things to do. And what we're doing here tonight is one of them. Parents are the most neglected part of the suicide prevention equation. So I want to thank all of you who are taking the time out to watch this. And maybe after you watch it, you'll decide to tell some of your friends to look at it in the recorded version, because it's just information I think every parent should have. You may or may not know that suicide at the current time is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. 24 is the age that the Center for Health Statistics kind of puts youth. It's usually you see 10 to 14 and 15 to 24 when you see youth suicide statistics. And for both of those groups, it's the second leading cause of death. You may have seen a lot of information in the news over the last year about there's really been some concern because there's been an increasing risk for 5 to 11-year-olds in the last year that have been reported by visits to the emergency department for suicide ideation. That means thinking about suicide. It doesn't mean that they attempted or they completed, but they're thinking about suicide. The dramatic increase in attempts to 10 to 14-year-old girls, that went up in a 15-year period, 200%. And part of the reason for that, and we could certainly do a whole workshop on 10 to 14-year-old girls, couldn't we? The part of the reason for that is the age of puberty is decreasing for girls, and a lot of mental issues, challenges, problems, etc., come up with puberty and the beginning of hormones. So we know that that's a reason for that. And I have to say, I couldn't do this for all of these years and really devote myself to this if I didn't know that prevention does work. There are a lot of people who think about suicide, but most of them don't die by suicide. And that's because prevention works. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, are some of the simple things. This doesn't require you to have a mental health degree or 27 initials after your name. It's simple. And we're going to give you the simple facts about suicide prevention. But one of the questions that often comes up is, can't talking about suicide plant the idea in the mind of some vulnerable kids? And I'll tell you the answer to that is it depends on how you talk about it. That's why this Lifelines program that your school is using, we use something that's called safe messaging guidelines. These are things that have been established by the experts in the field, if there are, and that really tell us how to talk about suicide in ways that don't glamorize, don't sensationalize, don't encourage. We also know that we don't talk about it in an assembly. We don't bring in someone who's made a suicide attempt to talk about their attempt, or even a parent who has lost a child to suicide, because kids don't remember the prevention message. All they remember is the story of someone who did something that was very sad. And what we know about talking about this is you provide permission to vulnerable youth who are thinking about suicide to be able to have a conversation about it. So in fact, you open the door to something that can often be a terrible secret that kids are keeping. You may have also heard that talking about suicide is just a way to get attention. And you're probably going to be surprised at the answer I give you to this, because I'm going to say, yes, it is. But it's a way to get attention just the same way a person who is drowning yells help. And it's so much better to have someone ask for attention than to act on those feelings and do something. So it really is, if somebody's talking about suicide, we need to pay attention. We are their lifeguards, important to know. And finally, the question if it's safe to talk about suicide in the school. As we said before, it's how it's talked about that makes it safe. A little while later, Marney is going to tell you the way we talk about it in Lifelines. And I will tell you, the Lifelines curriculum started in Westfield, New Jersey in 1983. So it's been around forever. It's been revised by evaluation and kind of adapted to, kids sort of changing mores and the way they live. And there's never been a situation where there has been a suicide related to the teaching of Lifelines. So I will just share that with you. What we do with kids is we don't just talk about suicide. We never give information without the direction about what to do about it. You're going to give a lecture about suicide and say, oh, it's the second leading cause of death, blah, blah, blah. And then kids go, so what? So we say, so what? Here's the so what. This is how you ask for help. This is where you go in your school. And this is what you do if you're worried about yourself or a friend. And again, the reason that it is important to talk about it, you'll see on our next slide, and this is national data, at least 30% of kids are going to tell somebody else. So there's at least 30% of kids in your school who may be carrying that information from a peer. Maybe not even a friend, maybe it's just a kid in their class who said something or done something that's made them concerned. So what you're doing is you're telling kids what to do with that information that they're getting. So it's a very practical application. And the practicality of this, I'm a clinical social worker, so I'm in mental health, but I also believe that a much better approach to suicide is public health. We're much more familiar with public health, aren't we, because of COVID? We see that it may be challenging, but the goal of public health is prevention, isn't it? It's to prevent something from happening. So we like to think that we take that prevention perspective in Lifelines. And one of the things that gives us a better understanding of suicide is if we use what we call a behavioral definition. What this means is that it explores the reason behind the suicidal behavior, the why, rather than defining suicide simply by its outcome as someone does something with the intent to die. And this is a conversational definition. It is accurate in the field of suicidology. We've adapted it from one of the leaders in the field, but it makes it so much easier for all of us to have a conversation about it. And the definition is that suicide is an attempt to solve a problem of intense emotional pain with impaired problem-solving skills. So what you can hear, there's three parts of this, aren't there? First of all, there's some kind of problem that's going on. It's causing a lot of emotional pain and distress for the person, and that's interfering with their effective problem solving. Pretty simple, isn't it? This is true across the life cycle. And you can see how much easier it is to approach suicide when you think of it this way, because it leads you to this very, very simple question. What's going on in your life right now that has you feeling so terrible that you'd rather be dead? So you can see how you can have this conversation without ever using the S word suicide. Because you're talking about something's happening and you really wish you'd be dead. You're not safe with yourself. That's what suicide is all about. And I know some of you may be uncomfortable with the word suicide. I know sometimes I've been uncomfortable with it. And that's why to talk about somebody not being safe with themselves, it's a lot easier conversation to have. And you can see, you ask that question, you don't need to be a mental health clinician or have a PhD to ask somebody, what's going on? Something's happening. You're having trouble. You seem like you're real upset and it's making you feel like you want to die. Tell me more about that. Okay. We also want you to know that we teach kids, and everything that we're kind of telling you, we teach your kids. We also take a look at what the warning signs are for suicide. And years ago, when we developed this program, I developed this with a colleague, John Califat, who was a community psychologist. And I was a clinical social worker. He's a community psychologist. So between social work and community psychology, we really had a very practical perspective for this. And we realized lots of people talk about warning signs for suicide, and they talk about risk signs, and they get them confused. And it seemed to us that if we used a traffic light, it could make it much clearer, with the amber or the yellow lights being the risk factors. I'll tell you what that means in a minute. The red lights that say stop, 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 those are the warning signs. And their opportunities for prevention are there in the green lights, which are the protective factors. And we often forget about protection. We talk a lot about risk and warning, and that's unbalanced. We've got to balance it with hope. You know, if there's one thing people who are struggling with suicide need is some hope. And one of the ways we give them hope is just by looking at something like this and saying, there's a green light on there. That means there's some good stuff out there for you. Okay. So the risk factors, the definition that we use of risk factors are their traits, their attributes, they may be characteristics, any kind of variables that are associated with the increased risk for suicide or suicidal behavior. And what I want to say to you, again, and we're using public health, so I'm going to use a health model. I'm going to say to you, think about heart disease and the risk factors for heart disease, right? We know that there's smoking, they're drinking, being overweight, not exercising. Somebody could have all of those risk factors and never have a heart attack. It just means they're at higher risk than the general population. So, we want to kind of balance this out. Lots and lots of people have risk. Lots of kids start school with risk, they leave school with risk, and they never are suicidal. So don't get kind of overwhelmed with this idea of risk. The most significant risk factors, if you have a family history of suicide, we used to think it was about social role modeling. I think what we've learned in the last 20 years or so, it really has to do with some of the biochemicals in the brain, that, there may be some difficulties in processing some of those neurotransmitters, and that may be what leads family members to be suicidal. If you have a mental health diagnosis, it just means you're vulnerable. It doesn't mean you're going to have it. And the mental health diagnosis that we often see in high school for boys is we often see those acting out, oppositional, defiant, those kids who are conduct disorders, getting into trouble all the time. For girls, we often see anxiety and depression. So those are some of the things that we look at. Younger children have a lot of that attention deficit. And as I said, it shifts at puberty. A previous attempt makes you at risk for a future attempt. You've incorporated suicide into your coping repertoire. It doesn't mean you're going to ever do it again, but it means you kind of scroll through all of your coping, and it's one of the things you tried once. And you can go by it quickly, but it just makes it something that's more available to you. When you're exposed to the death of a peer, under any circumstance, that can increase your risk. And I want you to hear what I'm saying about under any circumstance. It could be a death by cancer, could be an automobile accident. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago when 13 Reasons Why came out. And those of you who did not waste 14 hours of your life watching it, may not know, but they had a very graphic scene of a suicide in 13 Reasons Why. And unfortunately, research from around the country showed there was an increase in kids dying by suicide who watched that show. So we know that that's why you have to kind of pay attention to what kids are looking at. And we also know having access to lethal means. If you've got somebody you're concerned about even a little bit, the most lethal mean is having firearms in your home. So we suggest not that you don't have them, but you put them somewhere else as long as the risk is there. This is not about taking guns away, but just saying sometimes it's not safe to have them available. So these are those risk factors, those yellow lights. Let me tell you what the red light was all about. Those are the warning signs. kids. And because we're because we teach all the time, we come up with these little mnemonics so people can remember things. And I would tell you, we say it's for other people. I think it's as much for ourselves as it is for everybody else, because it's hard to remember stuff all the time. So the word that we use to talk about the warning signs of suicide is facts. They're feelings, there's actions, changes, there's threats or talk about suicide, and there's situations that serve as triggers to push someone who's vulnerable over the edge. The feelings are what you would expect, so we're not going to really go into those too much. And the challenge with this, of course, I know, is adolescents have feelings that are all across the board. I have 3 teenagers as grandchildren. So let me tell you, I got this feeling thing down, and it kids be really tricky. But so what you're trying to look for, though, are feelings that seem different or that last. A lot of kids are up and down and up and down and up and down, but you have feelings that last for a couple weeks, especially feeling depressed or feeling really sad. That's something that you want to pay attention to. The actions are kids who get in trouble, do risky things. The other thing, and this is why it is important to look at their social media sites, is sometimes kids look for ways to die online, or they send messages to others about wanting to die, and they're online. So that's an important thing to just kind of file away. The C changes, I think, is probably the easiest thing to pay attention to as a parent, because you know when your kid is changing, you know their rhythm. You know, when they have that, I mean, there's a normal up and down, there's a normal up and down. And when it's not that normal up and down, that's what you want to pay attention to, is something that's out of the ordinary. And you know that with your children better than anyone else. The talks or the threats can be just that really discouraging, what's the point of life? I don't want to be here anymore. Or it can be, I'm going to kill myself and I'm going to kill you. Sometimes that threat to homicide comes with the threat of suicide. And finally, those situations, those S, are the triggers, and they're like the straw that breaks the camel's back. What happens is a kid is dealing with all kinds of stuff, and something may happen and they just fall off. The things that could happen tend to fall into these categories. Kids who are really kind of vulnerable and they get in trouble at home, at school, or with the law, and their feeling suicidal takes place in the interval between when they get in trouble and there's resolution of the trouble. It's that period of uncertainty when you don't know what's going on. It also can be dealing with loss. For younger kids, it can be a loss in the family. It could be the loss of a pet for some kids. You know, I've known lots of kids in my practice, their best friend was their dog. I will tell you, my best friend is my dog, but we won't even go into that right now. But the point is, it's understanding that it isn't the kind of relationship, it's the quality of the relationship that you could lose. And we also know that dealing with a major change or transition is very, very unsettling for kids who are very anxious. We often call them the anxious worriers. They're the kids who worry about everything, just can't do anything. They don't have an accurate sense of their own skills. And so this is things like preparing for a big test, moving, that transition from junior high to high school. That becomes a time of high risk for some of those kids. So we need to pay attention to those. At home, let's just go with you very quickly over some of the warning signs you may see at home. Again, that change in appearance, but you have to rate that. I have a granddaughter whose hair has been rainbow green, yellow, and now is neon within a very short period of time. The change in appearance, that mood change, kids who are cheerful, who, you know, aren't cheerful anymore. And again, you got to factor those hormones in. And with girls, you must find out where they are in their menstrual cycle. I just will underscore this 100 times. It's an important thing for parents to be comfortable talking with their girls about, because you got to know that sometimes you just get off with rails that time of the month and you think it's you think you're crazy. So to have parents who say, something going on here, I think we need to talk about that. Increased irritability is something you often see in boys. Those changes in eating or sleeping habits, becoming uninterested in activities. In psychology, the name for this is called anhedonia. Nothing is fun anymore. The bullying behavior, either as someone being bullied, doing the bullying, or as a bystander, those somatic complaints, those headaches, those stomach aches, those vague things, really suicidal notes, because kids often write them. And there may be things that their friends are concerned about that they talk to you about. So these are some of the things to pay attention to. As we said, you're going to have a copy of this recording, so you can look at these things again if you need them. And there are handouts that Lifelines has that actually reviews these for you. But I'm going to turn this over to Marney now, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the prevention goals in your school.
Absolutely, right. So as Lenore and I said in the very beginning of the presentation, Henry Hudson is a Lifeline school. We, at the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County, we shepherd and we really take good care of our Lifeline schools. And what that means is that Henry Hudson staff are trained and supported by the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County in providing lifelines. And like Lenore said, this started 5 years ago or so, and it's really part of what Henry Hudson is and how you all work now as a community. So just briefly, the Lifelines is a trilogy. We mentioned that early on. And just to be clear, we're only talking about the prevention component of the trilogy today. And Henry Hudson is fully trained in all aspects of the trilogy. There is postvention, which is responses to traumatic loss in the community. There's intervention, which is how school counselors and school personnel interact with students who may be at risk for suicide or who may have indicated that they are concerned about their own safety. And then there's prevention, which is why we're here today. All three components, however, really provide a comprehensive program. It's evidence-based. As Maureen has said, we use a public health model for prevention, and it's sustainable, which means it's kind of rolling and everyone at Henry Hudson knows what they're doing and how to handle it. So the goals of prevention through Lifelines are simple, that everyone in a school community knows the warning signs for suicide, can identify students with those warning signs, and know what to do next, which is probably to make effective referrals. I want to clarify who the school community is, because the Lifelines model has a competent school community made up of administrators, all of the faculty and staff of the school, every single person who works in the school, bus drivers, front office workers, teachers, everybody. Then there's the students who are often forgotten about when you look at a school community as a community member. There's parents and guardians, that's you guys. And then there's the outside community. In this case, a classic example is Mental Health Association. We're here today as part of your community. So what's happened already and what's going to continue happening at Henry Hudson is everyone was trained in postvention and intervention, and the faculty who teach prevention and will teach it again this year, as well as school counselors, are trained on the Lifelines prevention curriculum and how to implement it with fidelity. All school staff at Henry Hudson receive a training on suicide awareness and prevention. That's, again, this competent community model. And then parents and guardians like you guys right this minute are receiving a training on awareness and prevention too. And finally, that's when students will participate in the suicide prevention curriculum. Now, what's happening this year is a little bit different than in previous years, and I'll go into that in just a moment, how that's going to be done at Henry Hudson this year. But you can see the idea here is that if everyone needs to know the warning signs, we need to make sure we communicate that with everyone, and that is what's being done. This instructional objectives is a fancy title for, this is really what our goal is for all of your students to walk away with after they participate in the curriculum. They'll know that their suicidal thoughts and behavior are a threat and something to be concerned about. They'll take their troubled peers and their own thoughts seriously. They'll know relevant facts about suicide, including those warning signs, those red lights that Maureen just talked to you about. They'll be able to, and this is key, demonstrate positive attitudes around intervention and help-seeking behavior. One of the things we really strive to do in the curriculum is refocus help-seeking as a positive thing to do, as opposed to a last resort sign of weakness. We really glorify help-seeking as a courageous, brave act that we want everyone to do. They'll know how to respond to troubled peers, and they'll know their resources, which includes being able to name 2 trusted adults and know what will happen if they talk to a trusted adult, which again is why we're talking to all of you, because we want everyone to know what to do in the event that someone identifies himself as having concerns about their own safety. All right, so that was a lot of words. Here is like bare minimum takeaway here. Social connection, help seeking, and knowing how to access in-school resources is really what we want students to know. Social connection is feeling connected at home, at school, or their community, right? So it's that it can be small or large, but we know that a huge protective factor is social connection. So we want to make sure we're helping students establish that. Help seeking, we just talked about that, so important. And then we want them to know how to get help in school or talk to their trusted adults and know what's going to happen. Know if they're going to go to a school counselor, what's going to happen and what that's going to look like. Because if you tell them what that's going to look like, they're more likely to do it, and you're getting rid of that hesitation about they're not sure what will happen if they go talk to somebody for help. So those are the big takeaways. Now, what I want to say here about the curriculum is this is the way the Lifelines curriculum is designed kind of to roll out in a normal course of a year. There's four 45-minute lessons that students learn once between 7th and 10th grade. Those lessons talk about those facts that Maureen just talked about, intervention steps, which is how to do something if you're concerned about someone, how to identify helpful people, those are those trusted adults, and how to know where school resources are. And then in 11th and 12th grade, there's two 45-minute lessons. And you know, that curriculum is really designed for the fact that 11th and 12th graders are going to be leaving high school soon. So we'll review the intervention steps with them, but then we talk to them about this transition after high school that's coming. What are their expectations or assumptions about it? And what's going to happen to their support system, and how can they be ready to have a new support system in their new life, whatever their post-high school life looks like. So that's the way it's rolled out. That's what the students learn. What I want to tell you is that this year at Henry Hudson, every single student in grades 7 through 12 is going to participate in the curriculum. So even if they've already received it, this will be a reinforcement learning opportunity for them. They're going to receive it again. So 7th and 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, throughout the course of the school year, will all receive this curriculum. The 11th and 12th graders will get those 2 sessions. 7th through 10th will get 4 sessions. This is just a really great opportunity and a commitment on the part of Henry Hudson to provide that reinforcement learning with the transition, you know, with the break that we've all had with the pandemic and challenges that schools have experienced. It's really smart of Henry Hudson to know that it's a really good time to reinforce some of these with kids who might have forgotten because the pandemic might have erased parts of their memory in their brain. So that's what's happening. And the last thing I want to say about this curriculum before I turn it back to Maureen to go over the last 2 things parents and guardians need to know is we've mentioned the word trusted adult several times. So I want to demystify what I mean by that. It's very simple. The curriculum is designed to help students identify these trusted adults in their lives, which are people they can turn to for support. And the key in this is we don't tell students in the curriculum who a trusted adult is, because students know, right? And so we ask them to name the qualities they look for in people who are helpful, people who they would turn to for a problem. And then after they define those qualities, then they name people who fit those categories, okay? And so what I'll tell you is that what we hear from kids is that you take what I say seriously. You listen to me when I talk to you. If you don't have time to talk to me right now, you tell me a different time to talk to you. And if I don't show up, you follow up with me and say, hey, I know you want to talk about something, right? So those are the kinds of things we often hear students say they look for in trusted adults. And we always encourage students to name at least 2 trusted adults. That's because one trusted adult can be hard to locate sometimes. If your trusted adult is your coach, is at school and is your coach, and it's off season and the coach is not even on school property, or it's the summertime, or it's in the evening. So having more than one, I mean, and it's at least 2, 3, 4, whatever they want to have is useful. And this is also where we really help and direct students to name trusted adults they can contact. So someone who they really connect with, but they don't have a way to contact them, isn't a particularly useful trusted adult. Because the idea is, who am I going to go to when something is going down and I'm worried about myself, or I'm worried about someone else and I need someone to turn to? And then last thing I'm going to say about trusted adults is that we encourage students to let these trusted adults know that I've chosen you as a trusted adult, because that sets the stage. Because what you don't want to have happen is a student go to somebody and with a crisis, and the person looks at them like they don't know what to do. Like, that sucking in breath is never a good response. And so to close the loop on the competent community, we encourage students to tell adults, I've selected you as a trusted adult and here's the reasons why. So that adult can be prepared in the event the student has something at some point they need them for. So I think that wraps up what students are learning in the curriculum and how your school is supporting suicide prevention. And I'm going to let Maureen talk about protective factors, and specifically now how you as parents and guardians can foster those.
Thanks, Marney. What I want to say is, I listen to what you're saying, and I kind of hear it. It really is very simple. We've taken complicated concepts and we've made them very simple. We define everything we talk about. We don't use any mental health jargon. And I would tell you, that's what we've learned from working with kids. We've worked with kids in varieties of difficult situations for many, many years, and they teach us, cut the crap, just get to the basic. And as I heard Marney talking, I could hear that we've really learned so much from them. And I know as parents, sometimes it's hard to see that. I know as a grandmother, sometimes it's hard to see it, but when you have a little perspective, you really can see the lessons they teach us. So I just wanted to point that out. So, all right, we're at that green light, the protective factors. What protective factors are, is their personal, behavioral, or situational characteristics that contribute to a person's resiliency, and they serve as a buffer against risk or stress. When we teach this to elementary school kids, because we teach protective factors to elementary school kids, this is some of what you may be familiar with, social emotional learning. This kind of fits into that. Well, especially Jersey Shore kids love this, because we tell them it's like the bumper cars. You know how you're in that bumper car and you bang into somebody and the bumper absorbs the shock? That's what protective factors are. They're bumpers on the car of life, and they absorb the shock when you get into a ding or maybe even a crash. And you can see with that image in your mind, it's much easier to think about what you might want to protect yourself. The protective factors for youth that have been established by research, everything we've given you is pretty evidence-based, unless we've said it's our idea, because we really try to give you, the best that's in the field. As Marney has mentioned, that contact with a caring adult has shown to be the most significant protective factor across the board for kids. And in the last 5 years, researchers have really felt that that's when they've added the 2 adults, because they've realized that sometimes that 1 adult is not available to you. And parents, it may not be you. What can I say? And you got to suck it up, because when my son told me it was my sister, I wasn't real happy about that, but at least he had somebody. So I think it's important to look at that. That sense of connection really addresses some of the isolation that kids often feel when they're struggling. And I think, as you all know, in the last year, that sense of social connection was so disrupted by virtual school that it's so important this year that there's a real emphasis on how do you connect with each other and how do you connect with the school traditions. The things that you just kind of did because, well, you did them, those pep rallies, they become so much more important because they're part of that integration into that culture of this group that is so much more than I am alone. Obviously, if you have positive self-esteem and good coping skills, some kids do. I haven't met many of them, but some kids do. And this one I think is really important. It says access to care for emotional, physical problems or substance abuse. It doesn't say you don't have them. It says you get care for them. So you can have those challenges, you can be challenged, and the protective factor is that you get some help. So you can hear that theme of help seeking in here. And then there's certainly are some cultural beliefs that discourage suicide and promote self-preservation. Most religious groups, I would say, fall into that category. In terms of what is it that you can do as parents, it's so important to teach your kids it's okay to ask for help. And, you know, it's, you got kids in 7th grade, you hopefully have been teaching them that a long time ago. But if you haven't, you can go home and say, you know what, I never realized how important it is to say this. You know, that there are times when even I need some help, and modeling it for them, because none of us can do it alone. And certainly in the pandemic, there were lots and lots of opportunities where people asked for help and couldn't make it by themselves. So reinforce those stories. Give kids permission to talk about traumatic events like suicide. And the way you do that is you tell them how you feel first. I understand that there was this traumatic event that happened and a student, you know, in your school died by suicide. It's really very upsetting to me. I don't even know what to make of it. How do you feel? You have to let yourself be vulnerable as a parent if you expect your child to be vulnerable. So practice letting them know how you feel about things. We've talked about identifying those trusted adults, and maybe not for you. Encouraging that participation in school and community activities. It's not just extracurricular. It's as important as what they're learning in school, especially this year when that social connection has been disrupted. Acknowledging your kids' efforts. You know, this is the one where sometimes the best you can say is, well, you're moving in the right direction. You know, it's D+, it's better than a D. It's that kind of simple way to note forward progress and be a good listener as often as you can. I have a 3-time rule that I let people have. You can tell me the same story 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I'll say, isn't that the story you told me about your cousin when he jumped over that bridge? And I go, oh, yeah. So you got to listen to it, but 3 times to hear the same story is enough. How you become a partner in prevention. You know, first of all, coming to this workshop, you're becoming a partner with your school. And, you know, I can't reinforce enough what Marney has said about Henry Hudson. You know, I've been in schools all over the country forever. And I don't throw praise out there just willy-nilly, even though I have somebody, you know, like Lenore on the call. But when we recognize, you know, schools that really are exemplars, and we really see your school as an exemplar of suicide prevention. So be an advocate, support your child when they get this curriculum, ask them what they're learning. Have them tell you, share some of your stories about what you knew about suicide when you were growing up. All of us have our stories. You want to become educated about youth suicide, especially in your area. One of the things you have is the Two River Coalition, and I know your school is a part of that. You know, as somebody who was kind of involved in the starting of that, they never stop. They're calling us all the time because they want this, they want that, they want resources for parents. There's a resource that's coming out probably within the next few weeks or so for parents on questions that you might have about your kids. And I'm sure the coalition is going to be, you know, kind of disseminating that. Be nosy about rumors and gossip. You know what? So what if your kids think you're a pest? They do anyway. And you want it, this one is a real tricky one. Monitoring behavior, especially underage alcohol use. This is not a conversation about alcohol, but I want to say we've been in too many schools where parents in the community tolerated underage really abuse of alcohol. It wasn't just experimenting, it was abuse. And that is a really major factor in risk for kids. Know what your resources are. We're going to give you some of them right now. And if your child needs some mental health services, you want to be an educated consumer. And MHA has some resources for you. And again, this is the one that's coming out that'll help you figure out, how do I get the help that my child needs? And that follow-up is so important. If there's anything kids say to us is, you know, yeah, my parents were real concerned for about a week, then they forgot about it. You got to stay in the game, guys. You got to stay. And it's not, you know, clinical conversations. It's just, hey, how you doing? I know we talked about you were worried about your friend a week or so ago. What happened with that? Tell me how that turned out. And finally, if you're worried about your child, which is the last part of what we want you to know, you have to know that you got to talk to your kids, but you got to listen to their answers. And I think one of the hardest things to do is if you ask a child if they're thinking about suicide and they say yes, what you're going to want to say to them is, oh, come on, it's not that bad. Or why are you thinking that? Or, oh, life will get better. You'll feel better next week. It's really, really important to ask them how they feel. And that's what I just did, was some minimizing of what they're telling you. So if they tell you that they're thinking about the fact that their life isn't worth living, take a deep breath and say those 3 magic words. Tell me more. Tell me more. They've never heard it before. Most kids never hear adults ask them to tell them more. We usually tell them, tell us less. So these are magic words that you can begin to use that will change your interactions with your kids. I guarantee you. Maybe not the first time because they don't know that you mean it, but they're the magic words, and especially important when you're worried about your child. And if there's something they tell you that really upsets you, you've got to act immediately. So we've got on this next slide some list of your local resources. You've got Monmouth Medical Family Crisis Clinicians. You've got Perform Care, who has the mobile response. The Family Crisis Intervention Unit, that's at MHA. And in your school, we know that your counselors have lots of private practitioners they make referrals to. So we'll just leave this up for a couple seconds in case you want to write any of these phone numbers down, and see if anybody has any questions.
Yep, and I'm just going to say, you can write this down. Feel free to take a photo of the screen. You just might want to have this handy in case you ever need it. And if you take a photo of the screen, it'll be in your photo album for all time. Because if you're like me, you don't clean out your photo album very often. This is just about where we are wrapping up today. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and we can address them. As I think we've indicated, this has been recorded. The recording will be available through Henry Hudson, and also the slides will also be available just by themselves as well. And so that resource, I'm sure you'll get an email or it'll be available on the website. Oh, Lenore, how will it be available to people?
They will be emailed to all parents at the conclude, probably tomorrow.
Yes.
And everybody gets them.
Super.
I'll put them in a PDF, and then we will put the audio on the website when we receive it from you, so that we share that. And I do know that the superintendent, I've already shared what we were doing, and she's going to do a link as well in her newsletter. So, you know,
Great.
and it'll go, and I do a weekly, what's called Hudson Happenings. Everybody will get this in some form so that we know they have received the information. That's been really extremely well done and explained.
Excellent.
Great.
And so I'll just say that everyone who's here with us today, and the event that when you were listening to this, you thought of someone who you thought, geez, maybe so-and-so would benefit from hearing this, or if someone came to mind, when you get that email from Lenore next week, don't assume that that person who you think might need to hear this is going to click on it. Be the one who shares this information with them and just says, I listened to this, it was worthwhile. I thought you might like to hear it too. So it doesn't seem like we have any questions, but
I see,
go ahead,
Marney,
Lenore.
there's one, is there something in the chat, or was that, I see what, there's something in the chat. I didn't.
Yeah, that was something I sent to you about how many people we had on at the time.
Oh, okay. So, does anybody have any questions for any of us? I mean, I see that even Mr. Stabile, who happens to be one of my health instructors, and he's our Lifeline guru actually online today. So, you know, and also obviously I'm available. Again, it's a sensitive subject, but as Maureen said, it shouldn't be. It should be one that we talk about. You know, it's funny. I use the tell me more in my presentation without knowing Maureen was in my presentation. So, you know, as a counselor for a good part of my own career in education, I know how important it is to have kids talk and just listen. And, you know, I can't thank Maureen enough and Marney for allowing us to be a part of their world for a little bit. And I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the presentation. I also want to reinforce to those parents that are here, we also have a contract now with the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County. I am also part of the Two River Competent Community Administrator that's working to develop things in the Bay Shore, but also we will be providing services to our parents who may not have the resources. We're actually going to have a therapist hired from the Mental Health Association who'll be working with families in Henry Hudson. We hope to have that started within the next month or so. So we're just wrapping up the contract for that. And also they'll be providing trainings and lots of great services. We had these services back when Sandy happened, and I feel like the pandemic is very similar to what Sandy did to our school and our community. And, I was there in 2012, and now I'm here in 2021, which are the same numbers in the same order, reverse. So that's a little scary. So maybe I got to go. So no. So I don't. So I want everyone to know that we have a lot of resources. I am very passionate about mental health, always have been. It's been a big part of my career, obviously, and my having a master's in education and working with children and young adults. And I have on my door that I'm a trusted adult, and many kids do talk to me, although they will never admit that they came to the principal to share their, private thoughts, but many do. And I've made it a point this year, and I say this, and Maureen brought it up, I say hello to everybody by name, even when they look grim, even behind the mask, because everybody wants to be known. Everybody wants that connection. And so it starts for me with, hey, good morning. How are you? How's it going? And I'm, I'm in that hallway, and I know it's obnoxious to some because they're asleep, but it's still something that's that connection. And I thank you for this connection because it was really important. And we had a really nice crowd. So I'm really, really happy that our parents signed on. And I'm sure there were others who wanted, a lot happens during the week. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. We never go away, so we're around.
Thank you, Maureen.
All right. Take
Bye.
care. Bye, all.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Maureen. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
So good to
everybody.
see you.
All right.